the American bison used to have this range here in North America, and these enormous herds, sometimes 2 or 3 million animals large, would move up into the North Country in the winter, in the summer, and then when it gets cold up there, they'd migrate back down. And the Native American populations would follow them, at least some of the Plains Native Americans. It's an important part of their culture. Look at the range of these things. They used to encompass enormous range. We don't have any migratory bison anymore. Scattered around the Great Plains are small pockets of bison in reserves, but we went from this, the 1860s and 70s, to about 1900. They looked around for some bison. Someone said, hey, where'd those damn things go? And they couldn't find any. And they found them in zoos. That's how bad we handled that resource. So, the Native Americans certainly knew their biology really, really well, and it was a major part of their culture, at least that area. And then we arrived, the Europeans, and actually out of Chicago and St. Louis, they built train lines out into the prairie. They didn't go anywhere, so they went out into the prairie, and they drive the trains out in the middle of the prairie, and people would shoot bison from the windows. And that was you'd pay to do that, and then the train would go back, and they'd just leave rotting carcasses all over the prairie. We'd like to think even 150 years ago we would be smarter than that, but we weren't. Whales migrate, and I was thinking of doing a field trip, but I didn't get money for it, but and summer's not the best time. But the gray whales make this cool migration, and I would encourage you, have an extra $30, $40 to spend, go down to Island Packers in the spring or in the winter when they're making that move, and they'll go out whale watching. You go out for like an afternoon, and it's like $30, $40, and they're really good at finding these things, and it's kind of neat to see them. Sometimes that's all you see. And sometimes you see dolphins, and dolphins are pretty exciting. And the humpbacks make these big migrations. These aquatic things go up in these cold waters in summer to feed. These are very nutrient-rich. Cold polar waters are nutrient-rich, and that means there's a lot to eat. And so they go up there and feed, and then they come down to the rather nutrient-poor tropical waters to have sex and have their babies, and they move back and forth. This creature, the first seal, look at that. That's in the Aleutian Islands. This creature nearly went extinct around World War I, around 1915. And careful conservation, we brought that thing back to look at that. It's amazing. But they do the same kind of thing. They have feeding grounds, and they have breeding and child rearing grounds. When I see a picture like that, imagine if you walked out there, it was safe, but it probably wouldn't be, but if you could stand right there. The thing I think of overwhelmingly is you'd probably be retching from the smell. If you've been around sea lions or sea lions when they're on the shore, they live in an environment where the ocean comes in twice a day and flushes their toilet. So they're just wallowing around in feces and urine. And they eat fish, so fish poop smells really, really bad. So it's kind of neat. Anyway. There's hibernating bats. Bats are small mammals, and they have to preserve their body warmth. And when you see them hibernating, they often pack together in a little group to conserve body heat. They'll hibernate in nooks and crevices. Some of them migrate to places to hibernate. Some of them just disappear into caves during the winter. Mammals fly. It's just random mammal things. Mammals fly. We've got what I call aerial locomotion there, because when we talk about flying, when we use the word flying, that means powered flight with flapping your wings. But we also have non-powered flight. There's what we call locomotion. Gliding is non-powered flight, and we see in several different groups of mammals evolve this. The familiar one to most people is what we call flying squirrels. And they have a big expanse of skin along their side here, like a cloak, and it's called the patagium. And when they jump, wrong way. When they jump, they can spread that out, and they can catch some air, and they can glide. That's not true flying, but you can get from tree to tree to tree. And they're just so much neat stuff in North America, and they're just delightful when you're out and about with them. Remember lemurs, the really primitive primate? There's a lemur that does a very similar thing, and it's a flying lemur called a caloga. And this one, I think from South America, flying marsupial. So, same adaptation appearing in several different divergent groups. Bats fly. They have true powered flight. They flap their wings and they get lift and they get thrust, and that's flying. And we've talked about bat anatomy a little bit when we talked about their wings. Their wing is actually their hand, and these are the fingers. So the fingers are extremely long, and the membrane stretches between them. They're very different than a bird or even a pterosaur. They're typically nocturnal. You know that. That's why they're scary. We have them at Halloween. Daytime they find roosts and they hang from things usually, and at night they go out. They eat moths and mosquitoes and flies. They eat enormous quantities of insects. They're good to have around. They have a remarkable sensory apparatus with sound. They put out pulses of sound. At my age, I can't hear them much anymore, but you guys may be able to still hear at least some of it. But they're high frequency pitches, and they throw them out there, and then they get a return off of a moth or a mosquito or a fly. And then they will fly in there, and they'll actually scoop that mosquito with one of their wings or with their feet and throw it into their mouth. And they'll do that all night long. And this is really precise. They can fly around in a huge flock and not bump into each other. They can fly around in a cave and not crash into the walls. They're not blind, but they don't see very well, but they have tremendous awareness of their environment. And you can do experiments. You get a big like airplane hangar, and you let bats fly around in it, and you release mosquitoes, and you can study this, and you can photograph it. And some scientists made a little device with a little jet of air. They throw a mealworm or a cricket up into the air, and then they could know precisely where it was, so they could photograph and say how the bat caught it. And then they just got fun with it, and they got little mealworms made of plastic and threw them up in the air. And the bat could tell a plastic mealworm from a real mealworm, and it would not orient on a plastic mealworm. They get lots of information, and if you look at their faces, the ears in particular and structures on the nose are about processing and funneling that sound in just the way they need it. So it's an elegant group of creatures. This one catches fish. It flies around, South America if I remember correctly, flies around over still water, and it can sense the ripples of a fish near the surface of the water, and will go down and scoop fish out of the water. Like that. The vampire bat does not suck blood. The vampire bat, you've heard about that, has extremely sharp teeth, and will fly and land on a large mammal and make a little cut and drink the blood out. But it's not a sucking thing. It makes a little cut and then licks it off. And I should put a picture of a vampire bat. And their teeth are like, their canines are little daggers. They can make a little cut. Fruit bats are usually larger than these little insectivorous bats, and they're herbivorous. They eat rotting fruit or fruit. Some of them drink nectar out of flowers, and they're typically bigger. The little insectivorous bats, they're mostly fairly small. They're mouse-sized. A lot of them, these are kind of big, goofy things. Marine mammals, we're talking about sensory apparatus of marine mammals. They have something similar. They produce sonar. They put out pulses of sound, not in the air but in the water, and they can detect each other. They can detect food. They can navigate. They can talk. And marine mammals like this whale here have a big structure in front of their skull here. It's called a melon, and it's about processing that sound. What is this about? I added this the other day. Oh yeah, this could apply to birds, sometimes to fishes, things like that. But these are just ways that vertebrates interact with each other. Just some words here. A lot of mammals are territorial. Again, a lot of fishes are, a lot of birds are, and they have what's called a territory, and that's a space in the habitat that they demand access to, and they prevent others of their kind from coming in. And they do it with displays or with calls or with threats. Territory could be about where I'm going to live. It could be about the space I need to gather food. It could be the space I'm comfortable with my babies. It's the area that I defend from others of my own kind. And many, many mammals are territorial. And they enforce these territories with markings in some cases, particularly large ones. If your territory is so big you can't be everywhere. These are bear markings. Not a very good picture, but that's bear markings on a tree. Some animals will rub their antlers on them. The cats and the dogs are famous for peeing on things, and you know that. And when you walk your dog, it has to smell everything and pee on everything. And that's just a signpost. It says this cheetah's learning who came by here. And sometimes it's like, is she fertile or not? Okay. Get a lot of information from that. Home range is a different concept than territory. Home range is much larger than territory, and it's the piece of land that you use. And you won't necessarily defend all of it. You might defend a small corner of it, but you might roam and defend this large area. So a mountain lion is a big animal, needs a lot of food to support it, has a fairly large home range. These are spots where they track this particular mountain lion. She might have had a much smaller territory that she defended from other mountain lions, but this is where she roams for food, and it would overlap with other mountain lions' home range. Mountain lions are in the news a lot recently because we're doing conservation work, and they're showing up in Simi in Moore Park. So anyway, something about mammals. I just put this on the board. I erased it already. So mammals. There's our group there. These are some of the things in the fossil record that lead to them. Okay? Any questions? Let's close the book on mammals. Like I said, if they hire a mammologist or someone who works with mammals, maybe that's a class that we can taught someday. That looks like a ton of stuff. I can't believe we did that. That's got kind of fast, doesn't it? All right, there's two more things I want to do. Which one should we do? So most of the exam Friday is going to be birds and mammals. I've got some kind of more general stuff here. This stuff will be covered, but not as much detail. And it doesn't mean stop listening. I thought we'd talk just a little bit about the skeleton. I posted a new version of this morning because I simplified it before class, even more than it already was. So there's a newer version. If you download this before this morning, there's a newer version. I thought we'd talk a little about the skeleton. The skeleton is composed of all these bones or cartilage that come together. And the thing I want to focus on, though, is the cranium. That trait that one of the traits that defines the vertebrates, the cranium. And if we look at our evolutionary tree, let's think way back to like day one. Cranium, or skull, is the thing that defines the vertebrates. One of the things. That's an important thing. Another place where the skeleton comes into play is an endoskeleton defines the bone vertebrates, things we call the osteichthyons. So there's two things to look at here, the cranium and the skeleton as a whole. So there's a shark skull or cranium, and we want to spend probably more time on the rest of the skeleton here. We looked at these in lab. And there's also what's called the axial skeleton, and that's the vertebral column, and anything associated with it. In fishes, we've got fins. So that's the ax. We've got the cranium or skull, we've got the axial skeleton, and then the third part of the skeleton is what's called the appendicular skeleton. And that would be the limbs and the limb girdles. And that's the best slide I could find of that. I don't like it. I couldn't find a better one. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time there. So what is the skeleton made of? It's a complex construction. By the time you see a fairly advanced jawed vertebrate here, like a bony fish, it's a mixture of different materials and different evolutionary origins and different constructions. But mainly we boil it down into it's made of bone and it's made of cartilage. And sometimes just cartilage, but bone and or cartilage. Cartilage. Let's define these terms. It's not exactly as simple as you might think. Cartilage is soft. Hit your nose or your ears. It's living tissue. It's got cells in it. These are living cells. And the material around it we call the matrix. The material around the living cells is protein fibers, collagen, usually. So it's soft. That's cartilage. Bone, on the other hand, is hard. You know that. But the basic construction is almost the same. It's got cells in these little dark spaces are where living cells are. We looked at this in the lab, I think, like the first week. And it's surrounded by a matrix. In bone, the matrix is not made of squishy protein fibers. The matrix is made of minerals, calcium salts, phosphorus salts. So in both cases, we have living cells surrounded by a non-living matrix. So cartilage is kind of cartilage, at least the level we're going to worry about it. Bone is a little bit more complicated. There's two kinds of bone that we're going to worry about. There's a fish skull there. There's two kinds of bone. And they go by different names. I'm going to try to be consistent in the name I use. There's a type of bone called endochondral bone, sometimes called membrane or replacement bone. Okay? There's another type of bone called dermal bone, sometimes called membrane bone. Okay? If you look at a piece of bone and you don't know the history of the bone, you pull a bone out of your skull, you can't always tell just by looking at it which kind of bone it is. It has to do with how they form. It has to do with their embryology and their evolutionary origin. Endochondral bone. Okay? Sometimes called replacement bone, sometimes called cartilage bone. The big deal with endochondral bone is it starts off as cartilage. This is a fish skull. It starts off being built as cartilage, and then the matrix is replaced. Remember, the matrix is the protein fibers matrix here. Those protein fibers are gobbled up and replaced with the mineral salts, the calcium and the phosphorus. So endochondral bone starts as a little template of cartilage, and that's replaced by bone. Okay? The other kind of bone is called dermal bone. Dermal bone does not have a cartilage replacer, a cartilage template. Dermal bone forms directly. There's no little cartilage model for it first. And it's sometimes called membrane bone because where it forms between sheets of connective tissue called membranes. Remember, you were dissecting your best place you saw it is in your frog, and the digestive tract was held together by that thin material. That's membrane. And so sheets of membrane, two layers of membrane, and the bone forms between it. Okay? So two different types of bone. If I laid them in front of you, you couldn't tell the difference in the adult animal. But each type has a different evolutionary origin and a different embryological origin. So if we look at a shark skull, that's cartilage. There's no bone there at all. Here's a rabbit skull. This whole thing is inside here. It's been replaced with bone. So inside here, there's a whole bunch of that endochondral bone. The brain case is made of endochondral bone. Almost everything outside here, anything you can touch with your finger, that's bone that was added later. And that's membrane bone, or dermal bone. So when you look at a skull, like I said, you can't tell the difference. In fact, one type just bleeds into another type in the adult. But if we watched the embryology of this rabbit, we would see different parts of the skull forming in different ways and then growing together. So, fairly complex when you want to try to understand it. We don't have nearly the time in a class like this to play with it. I want to give you some idea of what it is. In you, here's you. So almost every bone on your skull you can touch. is a dermal bone. Your original brain case, and that's this back here, your original cartilage skull, some of the bones down here, and some of the bones underneath your brain would be your original cartilage skull. But if I put a skull in front of you, I'd say put your finger on a dermal bone, put your finger on an endochondral bone. Unless you knew, you couldn't, just by looking at them, tell one is the other. So, a lot more complicated than that, but we don't need the details. The skull has three basic parts. Three basic subunits. Okay? Okay, there. We can go through them one by one. Don't worry about these words yet. Three different subunits. Something called the splanchnicranium, something called the neurocranium, something we call the dermatocranium. Okay? Let's start with part number one, the splanchno. The splanchnicranium, I'm not going to use this word again, but it's something called the visceral skeleton. I have no idea why. And I looked up splanchno. That means intestine. I have no idea. The intestinal cranium. No idea. Because this is the splanchnicranium. The splanchnicranium is the gill arches and anything derived from gill arches. Remember, jaws are modified gill arches. So the jaws and the gill arches, that's the splanchnicranium, anything associated with them. So here's a picture of a primitive hypothetical vertebrate with gills. There's the gill openings in gray there. The yellow here, that's the splanchnicranium. Gill arches, these are bones or cartilages, and then whatever the jaws are made of. Okay? Subunit 1, gill arches and jaws. And not counting the jaws here, but the gill arches are probably the oldest part of the cranium. That's probably the part that came first. And there it is in the lamprey. Splanchnicranium there. Gill arches and things derived from gill arches. They don't have anything derived from gill arches, so there you go. And, oh, I thought I had a bony fish there, never mind. So that's the splanchno. The next thing up is called the neurocranium. Okay, and I got another word there, chondrocranium. We're going to differentiate those a little bit. Neurocranium, nerve center, brain. Think about the brain there. This is the brain box. And there it is in a shark. This is the part of the cranium that encloses the brain, the first part, the earliest part, let's put it that way. So there's a neurocranium on a shark. There's the splanchno in green, neuro in blue. Now, see the word there, chondrocranium? Almost an equal sign between the two. And I think the way we're using the word, we can use it as an equal sign. When it's in a shark, you call it the chondrocranium because it's made of cartilage. Chondro means cartilage. So that's the shark's neurocranium. It's also his chondrocranium. A little bit of a difference, but I'm not going to worry about it. So the neurocranium is the original brain case, and then anything derived from that. And in a shark, it's made of cartilage, but in a bony vertebrate, that original brain case gets replaced with bone, right? And that becomes endochondral bone. In a shark, these are all made of cartilage, the splanchnicranial elements, but in a bony fish, those get replaced with bone, right? They become endochondral bone. So brain case and associated structure. So the brain would be in there. Associated structure would be like the otic capsule where the inner ear is, the nasal capsule where the sense of smell is. That's all neurocranium. The last thing is the dermatocranium. There's a bony fish. We had this skull out in lab. This is Amia, right? Bowfin. The dermatocranium, is made of, as the name implies, dermal bones. These bones usually cover up earlier elements. Like the earlier cartilage elements are overlaid or covered with dermal bones. Almost anything you can touch there is a dermal bone. The original brain case, the original neurocranium is inside there. So dermal bones in the dermatocranium, These are the bones that overlie, replace, and augment the older cartilage bones. And I'm trying to see here, okay, here you go. This would be one of those earlier cartilage bones. This would be an endochondral bone, right? Here's the quadrate. But I can't, and that's a hyomandibular, that's one too. But almost everything else you can touch there is a dermal bone. It's basically covering up this stuff. So, chondrocranium. That's a word that really only applies to an embryo that only has early in its development, it only has a cartilaginous brain box and nothing that comes later. Or a shark. A shark has a chondrocranium. But again, it's not wrong to call that the neurocranium. There's a little bit of gray area there. So, shark, not made of bone, and none of those dermal elements are there because sharks don't have dermal bone. There's an alligator cranium. Here's a bony fish cranium with all the splanchnic cranium removed. Gill arches would be down here. Often we use the word neurocranium for a higher vertebrate, a bony vertebrate. And what that means is it's the ossified chondrocranium. The chondrocranium is now turned to bone, and dermal bones cover it up. So I'm putting my finger here. Right in here. That's the original chondrocranium. It's now ossified, so those are endochondral bones in there. Almost everything else you see or can touch are dermal bones that cover it up. So, I'm happy with chondrocranium and neurocranium being almost the same thing in our context. There's a naked fish neurocranium. Again, the jaws would be here, the gill arches would be here, the splanchnic cranium would be here. So, we have here a mixture of that original chondrocranium with the dermatocranium augmenting it. We good? Okay. Where does the chondrocranium come from? Here's a bunch of words we don't need. You can get those off the PowerPoint if you really want them. This is an embryonic vertebrate. No cartilage, no bone yet, or very little cartilage. These little red things, these are what these are. These are little cartilages that start forming. And they start very simply as little rods or little strips. And these are just those little cartilages. It's a tiny embryonic vertebrate skull. And as the embryo develops, these will grow and grow and grow, and they'll spread out, and they'll eventually form that thing that looks like a shark skull. But that's where it starts from. So, like this. And there's that shark skull. And if that's a bony vertebrate, that cartilage will be replaced with bone. And then overlaid and covered with dermal bone. That's just a neat little shot there. I think a zebra little aquarium fish, showing those little cartilages developing. Question?
So a bony fish only has a neurocranium?
Yeah, you wouldn't say a bony fish has a chondrocranium because it's made of bone. Mm-hmm. Chondrocranium says cartilage, right? Mm-hmm. The bony fish would have had a chondrocranium as an embryo. That make sense? Right. Yeah, I know that the words they overlap is the problem. So there's the splanchnic cranium. Why did I put this slide in here? This is review. This splanchnic cranium, there's Amphioxus, which is not a vertebrate, but there's his gill arches. This is a shark. There's his gill arches, and there's his jaws. Splanchnic cranium. There it is in the lamprey, right there. Lamprey has a very simple cranium right there. No jaws. And here it is in a shark. Gill arches and jaws. That's just a neat slide of the two together. The neurocranium here, which, again, is properly called a chondrocranium, because it's made of cartilage. And there's the splanchnic cranium there. Poor little guy. Okay. Now, jaws derive from the, I said visceral skeleton, so I wouldn't use that word again. You might not know that. Jaws derive from the splanchnic cranium. And without going into all the details here, these are gill openings, these little openings here, and these vertical things here. These are the cartilages or bones of the gill arches. And towards the anterior end of the mouth, two of those gill arches lose their function as gill arches, and they become the structure of the jaws. And it's two gill arches. One up front is the biting surface. This is like a sharp. And then the next one back is a support structure. So we're going from gill arches and then to having jaws. And details are not important, but that's why jaws are part of the splanchna cranium, because they're derived from gill arches. And there's a shark here. There's the gill arches, and there's two arches here that are part of the jaws now. There's what's called the mandibular arch. That's the mandibles. That's the jaw. Mandibular arch. And the next arch back is called the hyoid arch. Here's your hyoid's in here, right? Your hyoid bone. That's a support structure there. But it's no longer a gill arch. And there'd be gill openings between these. Okay? Just words. I can't get a right good temperature in. It's too warm for my sweatshirt, too cold not to have it. So. I'm not going to worry about the details of the jaw. Let's just move on. It's just we have names for everything. And we can track these bones. This is a shark. We can find this bone in you. It's in the roof of your mouth. We can find this bone in you. It's a lower jaw in a shark. It's a tiny piece of cartilage on the inside of your jawbone in you. But don't worry about that. So, okay. So, splanchna cranium, gill arches, and anything derived from them. Okay, we don't need that one. There are different types of jaw suspensions as we go from primitive vertebrate to more advanced vertebrate. And I'm not sure what, that's another word I need to look, I'm going to look up this morning, I forgot. There's a suffix to the word there, styly, and that refers to different types of jaws. There's 5 or 6 different ways jaws are constructed, and all of them end with styly. So paleostyly means no jaws, like a lamprey. I have to look that up. Old jaws. So that one's easy. Paleostyly, no jaws. But here's a little evolutionary tree of jaw construction, more detailed than we need. But here we are at the bottom with the most primitive kind of jaws that we can find in the fossil record. And then they get more advanced, and then they go 2 different ways. This way goes to tetrapods. This way goes to more fishes. But there are different kinds of jaw constructions here. And you can see they got them color code here. Different bones playing different roles as we move on up. So at the very bottom end, and we don't have anything alive that has these kind of jaws. There's jaws called autostylic jaws. Sometimes they're called autostylic jaws. I've seen both used here. And here you go. This is a autostylic jaw. This is a primitive ancient, remember placoderms, that very first jawed fish? That's the grain here. That's that first arch, the mandibular arch. And there it is. There's a slappy set of jaws. And that second arch, the hyoid arch, doesn't really play a role. That's in purple there. We don't have anything alive today with this construction. It is a fossil construction. And there we go. There's an acanthodian. These are placoderm. So there's that first jaw arch, and there a gill arch, and there's the second now. Not doing anything. So they were jaws. They weren't very good. But when you're the only one who has jaws, it doesn't have to be good at it. The next kind of jaws we do have alive today, and that's called amphistyle. Do you know what amphi means when you break it out of the Greek or Latin? It means both or either, like on either end. Amphistyle. Okay? That's a primitive fish, and here's the cartoon. Oop, yeah, there's the cartoon. Nope, that's not the one I want. Well, we'll go with this one. There's that mandibular arch, the front arch, and it still is forming the jaws here. And here's that second arch, the hyoid arch. And it's now playing a role. It's not a gill arch anymore. It's playing a role in supporting the jaws. We didn't have that. Didn't have that down here. There's that hyoid arch. It starts to play a role, and that's amphistylic. And amphi comes from the fact, here's that second arch right here. There's the first arch. Amphi comes from the fact that the upper jaw is connected to the skull at 2 points. Amphi, both, either, and. It's amphistylic. And that's a classic shark jaw. Step above, and it's the most primitive jaw we still have with us. It's these guys. We good so far? Let's track the fish route. Okay, this is the fish route here. Okay? Fishes have called hyostylic jaws. Hyostylic. And what that means is the jaws, or what it's trying to describe, is the jaws are suspended by the hyoid. And the hyoid arch is the second arch. So the jaws are no longer attached directly to the skull. They're actually hanging off part of that second arch, the hyoid arch, specifically a bone called the hyomandibular. That's a hyostylic jaw suspension, and that's anything above a shark has this. And so here's that lower jaw, right here. I know it's a complicated drawing. And here are elements of that hyoid arch. And there's the skull up there. So the lower jaw is suspended by all this junk up here. Okay? Fish route. Now we go back to a primitive fish, and let's go make a tetrapod. Okay? Oh, there's the 3 structures there. The yellow is that first arch, and purple's elements of the second arch. So you can see no participation in autostylic. The upper jaw is actually supported by that second arch in amphistylic, and hyostylic, it's actually hanging off that second arch. Okay? Let's go to tetrapods. This got all pixelated when I blew it up. Tetrapods have meta-autostylic jaws. And look at our cartoon here. That's that first arch, that's the jaw, upper lower jaw, and that's the second arch there, purple again. Plays no role at all in the jaw suspension. The jaws articulate directly with the skull. So, no role here, but not modified. Important support, actually hanging off. And something like this gives rise to this, where this little bone here loses its role in the jaws. And the jaws articulate directly with the skull. And that's called meta-autostylic. And that's a primitive tetrapod, like a frog. We good so far? There's a frog. So, there's his lower jaw, and that little bone that formerly was supporting the structure there is not anymore. And it ends up with a new function. No longer involved with jaws. It actually doesn't just disappear, it gets a whole new function. And there it is. It's that inner ear bone, which we've met before. That inner ear bone called the columella. That inner ear bone, and click back here for a second. That is this bone here, called the hyomandibula. In fishes and primitive jaws, it's part of the jaw construction. Tetrapods aren't using it in the jaw construction. It's right there by the inner ear. The inner ear is right there. The angle of the jaw is right here. It gets repurposed in that inner ear bone. So we don't call it the hyomandibula anymore. We call it the columella. We've met that before, right? That's a primitive tetrapod thing. And you can see a columella in a bird, in any other reptile, in a frog. This is a turtle here. And this is another turtle skull here. I love this picture here. You can see both of them. So the angle of jaw is right here. This is the back end of the skull, right? And there's that structure. So there's a dimetrodon, and there it is in cross-section. So it was sitting right back here, right next to the inner ear, which happened to be where the jaw was hinged, and it just got repurposed into transmitting sound. So that's the origin of the columella. There it is. Yeah. A well-prepared haired skull, reptile skull it shows. We got a few changes, and then we get mammals. The ancient mammal, these guys down here, actually these guys down here, had that structure, that function, that structure with columella. So this would have been all these early mammals. But how many inner ear bones do you have?
3.
3. We need to pick up 2 more inner ear bones. What we see here, we talked about this briefly the other day, is we see in the transition to modern mammals, we see the lower jaw in dark brown here, that bone called the dentary, becomes the entire lower jaw. But in more primitive tetrapods, at the back end of the dentary are other bones. And these are the bones that are the raw material for our inner ear. These lose their function as being part of the hinge. They're sitting there right there by the inner ear. And as mammals evolve hearing specializations, these bones, which were hinge bones, get repurposed into an ear bone. Well, 2 ear bones. And that's, when you get to mammals, that's called craniostyling. And in mammals, there's no junk between the lower jaw and the skull. It's a direct articulation. Craniostylic. The lower jaw is hinging. Lower jaw hinging right against the cranium. But there are those little bones hanging back there. They lost their role as hinge bones. They get repurposed as inner ear bones. So, in mammals, the dentary, which is the lower jaw, hinges against a skull bone called the squamosal, detail we don't need. It's called the dentary squamosal articulation. And little bones that were back here as part of the hinge and more primitive things get shifted into the ear cavity and become inner ear bones. So we already have the columella there. We add 2 more. Okay? So we can follow that one bone there, the hyalomandibula. In fishes, it's part of the jaw suspension. In non-mammals, tetrapods, it's the columella. In mammalian tetrapods, it's the stapes. 3 names for the same bone. Hyalomandibula, columella, stapes. And then these are the 2 other bones that we add. You got a picture of that? No picture. Yeah, these are the 2 other bones we add. So there's the stapes. There's the stapes. Well, columella here, stapes here. And then these were bones involved in the jaw angle, jaw right down here. And they get repurposed there. So mammals are hearing specialists. What this does for us, I don't know. But we are hearing specialists compared to a lot of other animals. Okay. Well, that was a lot of anatomy. That would probably be better handled in the lab, wouldn't it? I can get all the examples. Who's got a question? Like I said, if you downloaded this yesterday, I reworked this skull part, this jaw part, rather radically this morning when I got up. So there's a new version up if you want to get that. Any questions? Take 5-10 minutes? Yeah, let's take about 5 minutes. Then we'll go. Yeah, we'll end a little early again today, but I do have one more thing I want to talk about. May not finish it, but yeah. Take about 5 minutes now, and then we'll do a little biogeography, call it morning, and you can start thinking about your exam.